everyone. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 5 of ARBinBRIEF, the practical video guide on handpicked arbitration issues. My name is Alessa Pang, and I am part of the ARBinBRIEF team and practice international arbitration with Wong Partnership in Singapore. I will be moderating today's episode on procedural pressure points in energy and infrastructure arbitrations, featuring Alicja Zielińska-Eisen, partner of 𝗔𝗥𝗕𝗙𝗙, based in Warsaw, and Hyungyu Kang, partner with Yuchon, based in Seoul. Energy and infrastructure disputes often generate pressure well before the merits hearing, and decisions around urgent interim relief and the management of expert evidence can materially influence leverage, timing, and risk. Today, we'll focus on these two pressure points, and we'll start first with pre-arbitration interim measures. And I'll start with Alicja. Alicja, in energy and infrastructure disputes, parties commonly require urgent relief before the tribunal is constituted. At that stage, what considerations are in play when deciding between emergency arbitration and seeking relief from the national courts?
Thanks, Alessa. Thanks for invitation and having me here today. And going directly to your questions, I think it's worth to framing the energy and infrastructure disputes a little bit in the context first. So what can happen before a tribunal is constituted? What type of measures might be needed? And I just wanted to outline a couple of those to put my later presentation in the better context. So first thing that comes to mind is probably restraining calls, orders, direction on performance bonds, bank guarantees, other guarantees, including parent guarantees and other securities, which are probably the most frequent urgent measure in infrastructure disputes. And I would actually put my bets on more generally. The second type is freezing or asset preservation orders. That is when a big claim is coming, the respondent being, let's say, a subcontractor way, and the subcontractor is facing insolvency risk. The claimant, employer, ordering party in that scenario might have an urgent interest in seeking freezing or orders over key assets that has not yet been disposed of. Third group maybe, and I think that will be the last one I will mention, are orders to continue or suspend work. So while the relationship is still on and developing, the contractor may seek order compelling employer to certify and pay IPCs to avoid suspension. And on the other hand, employer might have suspension order in mind with regards to certain works which were not completed correctly, or there are some other faults that needs to be preserved. What can happen in that situation? I mean, all these three types of securities and situation that I've mentioned might call for urgent measures that cannot wait the weeks or even months for the constitution of arbitral tribunal. So in general, in the context of international arbitration, the party will be facing a three-way choice or consideration. It can either go to a state court and ask for interim measure or protective measure. It can ask the tribunal for assistance, and almost universally, all arbitration rules will provide for a specific regulation in that regard and give rather broad powers to tribunal to order interim measures. But until the tribunal is constituted, that avenue is not available to the party, irrespective of the wording of the arbitration clause and the party's choices. So a current trend in the arbitration rules provides that an emergency arbitrator procedure might be available to the parties. That, of course, needs to be compatible with the arbitration clause and the choices that the parties made in the arbitration clause, as well, of course, with the lex arbitri, the law of the seat that supports or governs the procedural aspects of the arbitration. And now turning to the critical points, how to make a choice given that the parties might be facing the choice between, on one hand, the for them foreign state courts and the arbitral special measure that is the emergency arbitration or arbitrator procedure. I think the key element is probably the efficiency. And with efficiency, I'm talking both about costs and time. So the first question to ask is, how long will it take? And what are the resources that you need to invest? And starting with the first prong, that is, how long will it take? That question is, or that answer is twofold. First, we are asking and comparing whether we can get the needed protection faster and in a more straightforward, practical way before the emergency arbitrator or the state's court. But the second prong of that question is, how long will it take for the party in need seeking the urgent relief to enforce it? And while in arbitration, the tribunal orders or the emergency arbitrators orders or award are said to have a high rate of voluntary compliance, this not necessarily need to be so. So the consideration here is also what would be the avenue and path that the party in urgent need needs to take to enforce if it comes to a non-voluntary situation where there is no compliance by the party order to or imposed under the injunction order or award. So speed, enforceability, counterparty profile, and the assessment of whether they will be willing to perform the order or award when ordered is another consideration. And here, I think, especially in an energy and infrastructure dispute, it's worth to mention that given that very often the order are being sought during the continuous relationships with the parties, I think that generally would rise the chances of voluntary compliance with tribunal or emergency arbitrator order or award issuing interim or protective measure. But this, of course, needs to be checked on case and assessed case on case-by-case basis. Yeah, I think these are the three key points I wanted to mention at this stage.
Yeah, so thanks so much. It's very, very comprehensive, and I think those are the practical considerations that parties would have, especially when deciding. I mean, when you want something that's effective, and in the case of something urgent, you want something that can work quickly, so effective and efficient. Just a quick follow-up. So that's usually the prelude to the arbitration. After the tribunal is constituted, from your experience, how does this typically engage with, or would the tribunal then engage with, or would it reassess the interim measures that have been granted by emergency arbitrator or courts?
So basically, to see what the tribunal powers with regard to the pre-arbitration interim measures are, we need to check, well, first, the arbitration law applicable, second, the arbitration rules applicable. But generally, the tribunal that is constituted to resolve the case on merits and finally resolve the case on merits is not bound by such measures. The question is like what they can do. I think on their own initiative, very little. There is no particular basis that I found that would allow the tribunal to act sua sponte. This, of course, needs to be done on a request of the party, and that needs to be justified with a view to change of circumstances. That would justify amendments, revocation, or other measure taken with regards to the emergency arbitrator decision. So once again, the tribunal is not bound by the emergency arbitrator decision. But what effectively will happen with such a measure in place will depend and be driven by the parties' requests with that regards. And also, interestingly, the rules will also very often provide until when the emergency measure is in place. And that will usually not be longer than the final resolution of the dispute by the tribunal that decides the case on merits. But there are also other pinpoints that, depending on the different rules, might play a role. So it's always good to consult a particular set of the rules and see how much trust in the emergency arbitrator decision the rules put in.
Yeah, I think that is also a bit of a relief sometimes to the party on the receiving end of the order, because they could be assured that actually that's just temporary and they could have it reassessed.
Exactly.
I'm gonna turn to the next issue now, on experts. Experts as procedural pressure points. And Hyungyu, maybe you can help us with this. So in large and construction and infrastructure disputes, expert evidence can drive outcomes. And from your experience, I mean, one of the issues that often comes up and does require expert input is delay. From your experience with delay experts, where would procedural pressure build up most acutely?
Well, thank you for having me as well. I think I'm going to make an example with the delay claims because I believe that's a quite unique feature of an infrastructure and construction disputes. For example, in delay claims, procedural pressure builds most acutely around two gating issues. First, the program, which program is reliable enough to serve as the baseline. And second is the methodology. What methodology should be applied to that program? Once parties diverge on either point, usually everything downstream tends to stall. Even on well-documented projects, this is common because there are often multiple program versions, logic changes, and recovery updates, and the parties disagree on which version best reflects the contractual and factual reality. In one case I handled, there were only a limited number of workable programs, which made it very difficult for the experts to converge on a common framework. The tribunal in that case ultimately ended up giving a determination on the program and methodology, but the decision itself became a procedural bottleneck and delayed the timetable. So the practical lesson is that the councils cannot treat this as something owned entirely by the experts. These methodological disputes often drive both the procedure and the outcome, so counsel needs enough fluency in core delay concepts to frame the right procedure directions. Yes, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, because especially sometimes just the way in which the evidence is presented, especially because delay in itself, these delay reports speak its own language. And if you are, especially if you're dealing with the tribunal that may not be as familiar or a particularly complex project, the presentation of the evidence and which links to the methodology used becomes critical in terms of how counsel in turn presents the case. So actually, one other thing I wanted to talk about was on presentation, right? So one of the things that a lot of tribunals in particular jurisdictions like to utilize is hot tubbing, because tribunals like experts in general to try to agree on issues and narrow the amount of issues in dispute. And one of the ways to try to do that is to move away from cross-examination and try to get them to do hot tubbing instead, get them questioned together. And I understand that, in Korean litigation, there's a heavy reliance on court-appointed experts. And so I'm just wondering how that influences how Korean parties perceive hot tubbing as a method for presenting party-appointed expert evidence.
So, as you say, Korean litigation traditionally relies heavily on court-appointed experts. Their views often carry significant weight and not always tested through the kind of adversarial or real-time challenge that party-appointed experts face in arbitration. Against that backdrop, Korean parties and sometimes Korean experts as well may initially perceive hot tubbing as unfamiliar, as somewhat offensive and demanding, because it requires experts experts to defend their reasoning on the spot and respond directly on opposing expert critics. That said, the impact is not just about familiarity. Hard tuning tends to expose differences in assumptions, program selection, and methodology very quickly, which can be highly effective. But it also rewards experts who can explain their reasoning clearly under pressure. So in my experience, not every technical strong expert is equally effective in that format. Some are excellent at articulating the logic and structure behind their opinion, while others are less comfortable communicating in a dynamic confrontational setting. Practically, this means counsel should assess early how their expert would perform orally and tailor the procedure accordingly. Such as the agendas, pre-hearing expert conferencing, and sequencing and question everything. And for arbitrators, I think it's sensible to, it helps to calibrate expectations. I mean, they should focus on what they should figure out of their presentation, not really on the presentation style of each expert delivers.
Thank you. I'm just watching the time, and I'm a bit conscious that we started a bit late, and I think we actually reached the end of the 15-minute mark, and I think we can continue this conversation in the Q&A segment. So thanks very much, Alicja and Hyungyu, for this incredibly insightful discussion. We would like to thank our partner organizations, AAA, ICDR Case Management Center, and ERA Pledge for their invaluable support in making Season 5 possible. And also truly grateful to the other organizations that have supported the marketing of our series. For those watching us on YouTube, our video ends here. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see all of you in future episodes, and we'd love to hear your comments and feedback. For those joining us now, we will now have a chance to pose questions to Alicja and Hyungyu in a more interactive format. Please use the Zoom webinar link that's just been posted in the chat box. We will see you there. Thank you very much.